In the vast, unforgiving theater of the Second World War, there are battles whose names are etched in blood and legend. Normandy, Stalingrad, Iwo Jima. And then there is Tarawa, a tiny, sun-scorched speck of coral in the middle of the Pacific, a place so heavily fortified that a Japanese commander boasted it couldn't be taken by 1,000,000 men in 100 years. In November of 1943, the United States Marine Corps was about to try and take it in 3 days. What followed was 76 hours of pure, unadulterated hell. A meat grinder of machine gun fire, mortars, and desperate close-quarters combat. But in the midst of this chaos, in the first critical hours, when the entire invasion hung by a thread, the outcome of the battle and the lives of thousands of men would hinge on the actions of one lone figure. This wasn't a general or a high-ranking strategist. He was a quiet, unassuming first lieutenant from Texas who, by all accounts, shouldn't have even been in the military. A man whose body was mapped with the scars of childhood adversity and whose spirit was forged in the hardships of the Great Depression. This is the story of William Deane Hawkins, a man who refused to die until his job was done, and whose incredible courage would earn him the eternal title, the man who wouldn't quit. To understand a hero like Deane Hawkins, you first have to understand the world that made him. He was born in 1914, a child of a world about to be torn apart by the Great War. But his own battles began much earlier. As a toddler still in his cradle, he suffered a horrific accident scalding himself with boiling water. The burns were so severe that he struggled to walk for the first year of his life, a constant painful reminder of fragility. The physical scars would remain with him forever, a faint roadmap of pain on his skin. His childhood was shaped by further loss and hardship. His father died when he was just 8 years old, leaving his mother, Clara, to raise 2 children alone in El Paso, Texas. She was a resilient woman working as a secretary and later a teacher at the El Paso Technical Institute to provide for her family. They weren't wealthy, but they had grit. This was the America of the Great Depression, a time when self-reliance wasn't a choice. It was the only means of survival. Deane Hawkins embodied that spirit. He was bright, graduating from El Paso High School at just 16 and earning an engineering scholarship to the Texas College of Mines. But his education was a patchwork affair, stitched together between periods of working any job he could find. He was a cartographer's assistant, a railroad brakeman, a ranch hand, and even an insurance clerk. These weren't just jobs to pay the bills, they were his real-world education. Ranching in the rugged Texas landscape taught him independence and observation. Working the railroads gave him a powerful physique. Engineering gave him a mind for solving practical problems. He was becoming piece by piece the exact man the Marine Corps would one day need, long before he ever considered wearing a uniform. Then, on December 7th, 1941, the world changed forever. The attack on Pearl Harbor sent a shockwave across America, and like millions of other young men, Deane Hawkins felt the undeniable call of duty. His first instinct was to fly. He applied to the Army Air Corps. They rejected him. The scars from his childhood burn, they said, made him unfit to be a pilot. He tried the Navy's air arm. They rejected him for the same reason. For a man who had overcome so much, it was a bitter pill to swallow. But William Deane Hawkins was not a man who took no for an answer. If they wouldn't let him serve in the air, he would find his place on the ground. On January 5th, 1942, he walked into a recruiting office and enlisted as a private in the United States Marine Corps Reserve. The service with the toughest reputation had just gained one of its toughest sons. The Marine Corps didn't see scars, they saw potential. Hawkins blazed through boot camp in San Diego and was immediately singled out for his intelligence and quiet intensity. He was selected for the elite Scout Sniper School, a course designed to create the eyes and ears of the infantry. These weren't just marksmen. They were masters of reconnaissance, infiltration, and survival. It was a role that fit him perfectly, appealing to the observational skills he'd honed as a ranch hand and the precision of his engineering mind. By the summer of 1942, Private Hawkins was shipping out to the Pacific. His destination was a malaria-infested, jungle-choked island that would soon become infamous, Guadalcanal. This was his baptism by fire. On Guadalcanal, the war wasn't about grand strategies. It was about small unit actions, patrols that disappeared into the suffocating green hell, and sudden, violent encounters with a determined enemy. It was here that Hawkins's natural leadership exploded onto the scene. He had an innate understanding of jungle warfare. He was patient, observant, and possessed an almost preternatural calm under fire. He led his men on dozens of dangerous patrols, gathering critical intelligence and eliminating enemy threats. His superiors took notice. In a move almost unheard of, he received a battlefield commission, rocketing from a private to a second lieutenant in a matter of months. The men who had been his peers were now his command, but they followed him without question. They trusted his judgment because they had seen his courage firsthand. One little-known story from his time on Guadalcanal perfectly illustrates his character. While leading a patrol, his unit came under heavy fire from a Japanese machine gun nest. The men were pinned down, unable to move. Without a word, Hawkins crawled away from his men, circling through the dense undergrowth until he had a clear flanking shot. He single-handedly took out the position, allowing his patrol to advance safely. He never spoke of it, never sought praise. For him, it was simply the logical solution to a deadly problem. This experience on Guadalcanal was crucial. It taught him the supreme importance of proactive, aggressive action and the value of precise, overwhelming firepower against a fortified enemy. It was a lesson he would carry with him to his next destination, the blood-soaked beaches of Tarawa. By November 1943, now a first lieutenant, Hawkins was given command of the 2nd Marine Division's Scout Sniper Platoon. This wasn't just any platoon, it was his platoon. He had trained them, molded them, and imbued them with his own aggressive philosophy. They were a small, elite unit of about 20 men, tasked with being the tip of the spear in the upcoming invasion of Baitio Island in the Tarawa Atoll. Their job was to go in first, identify enemy positions, and wreak as much havoc as possible before the main assault waves hit the beach. It was, in essence, a suicide mission, and Deane Hawkins was the man who would lead it. The Battle of Tarawa was flawed from its first moments. The plan relied on a high tide to carry the Higgins boat landing craft over a treacherous coral reef that surrounded the island. But on the morning of November 20th, 1943, the tide was unexpectedly low. The landing craft slammed into the reef, hundreds of yards from the shore, leaving the first waves of Marines tragically exposed. As they disembarked into the chest-deep water, the Japanese defenders, safe in their reinforced concrete pillboxes and coconut log bunkers, opened up with a horrifying barrage of machine gun and artillery fire. The lagoon turned red. Men were cut down in droves, their advance slowed to a desperate, crawling wade through a curtain of steel. The invasion was stalling before it had even begun. The Marines were trapped in a killing field. It was into this nightmare that Deane Hawkins and his Scout Sniper platoon arrived. Their amphibious tractor, or Amtrak, managed to crawl over the reef and make its way toward a long wooden pier that extended some 500 yards from the beach. But it too came under a torrent of fire. It was clear that sitting in the vehicle was a death sentence. While other units were pinned down, paralyzed by the sheer volume of enemy fire, Hawkins made a decision. He would not wait to be killed. He would take the fight to them. He was the first man out of the Amtrak, plunging into the water and yelling for his men to follow. They didn't head for the relative safety of the seawall on the beach. Instead, Hawkins led them directly toward the pier, the very source of the deadliest fire. Crawling and running from pylon to pylon, using the thick wooden posts for cover, he began a one-man assault. He was loaded with grenades and demolition charges. As his men provided covering fire, Hawkins would creep forward, get within throwing distance of a Japanese machine gun nest, and toss a grenade through its aperture. A deafening blast, a cloud of smoke, and one more gun fell silent. He did this again and again. He was a phantom on the pier, a relentless engine of destruction. Eyewitnesses described him as completely fearless, moving with a cold, methodical purpose. He systematically cleared one enemy position after another, single-handedly carving a path of relative safety along the pier. This wasn't just random bravery, it was a calculated tactical move. He understood that the pier was a funnel of death, and until it was cleared, the main force of Marines would never make it ashore. His Medal of Honor citation, a document often written in dry official language, struggles to contain the sheer audacity of his actions. It states he fearlessly exposed himself to the crossfire of enemy machine guns and unhesitatingly moved from cover to cover, wiping out one position after another. To the terrified Marines hunkered down in the water, watching this lone figure take on the entire Japanese defense, it was an almost unbelievable sight. He was giving them a chance. He was their hope. At one point, a Japanese shell exploded nearby, peppering his shoulder and hip with shrapnel. The wounds were serious, bleeding profusely. Any other man would have sought medical attention, his part in the battle honorably finished. But for Deane Hawkins, the job wasn't done. The men of his platoon saw him grimace in pain, then calmly take off his own belt and fashion a crude tourniquet to slow the bleeding. When they urged him to go back, he refused. This was the moment that cemented his legend. This was the birth of the nickname whispered in awe by the men who saw it, the man who wouldn't quit. Ignoring his wounds, he continued his assault. He led a small group of his men in a charge against a heavily fortified pillbox, coordinating their fire, before personally finishing it off with a demolition charge. He destroyed another, and another. Over the next 30 hours of continuous savage combat, First Lieutenant Hawkins would be personally responsible for destroying at least 7 enemy strongpoints. He was everywhere, leading small unit attacks, directing fire, and personally engaging the enemy. On the morning of the 21st, despite his growing weakness from blood loss and exhaustion, he was still at the front. He spotted a group of Marines pinned down by 2 machine gun nests that were preventing the American advance. Gathering his last ounces of strength, he began to crawl toward them, grenades in hand. He successfully destroyed one of the positions. As he prepared to assault the second, a burst of machine gun fire stitched across his chest. William Deane Hawkins fell silent. His war was finally over. There is no real controversy surrounding the heroism of Deane Hawkins. His courage was absolute and witnessed by hundreds of his fellow Marines. The debate surrounding Tarawa was a much larger one, and it raged back on the home front. When the first newsreels and photographs from the battle were released, the American public was horrified. They saw images of floating bodies, of a beach littered with the dead. The casualty figures for a 76-hour battle over a 2-mile-long island were staggering. Nearly 1,000 Marines killed and over 2,000 wounded. Questions were asked in Congress and in newspapers across the country. Was this tiny atoll worth such a terrible price? Was the invasion poorly planned? For many, the Battle of Tarawa became a symbol of brutal, costly warfare, and it forced a national conversation about the true price of victory in the Pacific. Within this historical debate, the actions of Deane Hawkins take on an even greater significance. Many military historians and survivors of the battle argue that without Hawkins's initial solitary assault on the pier, the invasion might have failed entirely. By neutralizing those key machine gun positions in the first critical hour, he created the narrow corridor through which the 2nd Marine Regiment could finally establish a foothold on the beach. He didn't just save the men around him, he arguably saved the entire operation. His actions drastically reduced the casualties from what they might have been, preventing a bloody stalemate from turning into a catastrophic defeat. His 30-hour rampage against enemy pillboxes broke the back of the Japanese defense in his sector. His sacrifice and the sacrifice of the men who died with him was not in vain. It was the terrible necessary price for a crucial strategic victory. The impact of First Lieutenant Hawkins' sacrifice was immediate and has endured for decades. On the island of Betio itself, just 1 month after the battle, the newly captured and repaired airstrip was officially dedicated as Hawkins Field in his honor. It was a fitting tribute, a piece of hard-won land bearing the name of the man who helped secure it. On August 30th, 1944, his mother, Clara Hawkins, traveled to the White House. There, in a somber ceremony, President Franklin D. Roosevelt presented her with her son's posthumous Medal of Honor. The citation praised his dauntless courage and heroic devotion to duty, concluding that his indomitable fighting spirit and unyielding devotion to duty in the face of terrific odds were inspiring to those with whom he fought and reflect the highest credit upon the United States Naval Service. Just over a month later, on October 7, 1944, Clara Hawkins stood at the shipyards in Kearney, New Jersey. With tears in her eyes, she smashed a bottle of champagne against the hull of a brand-new Gearing-class destroyer, christening it the USS Hawkins DD-873. The ship, a powerful instrument of war, would carry her son's name across the seas, a permanent testament to his legacy. For decades, its crew and the veterans of Tarawa would make pilgrimages to his final resting place. After being temporarily buried on Betio, his remains were moved to the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu, better known as the Punch Bowl, where he rests in Plot B, Grave 646. But perhaps his most significant legacy is not in names on maps or ships, but in the very doctrine of the Marine Corps itself. The scout-sniper concept he so brilliantly demonstrated. Small, elite teams acting as a vanguard, using precision firepower to disrupt and destroy enemy defenses before a main assault, became a foundational principle for the future of Marine reconnaissance units. His actions at Tarawa are still studied today as a masterclass in leadership under fire at the Marine Corps Officer Candidate School. He is the textbook example of what it means to lead from the front, to seize the initiative, and to press the attack without hesitation. In his hometown of El Paso, Hawkins Road and Hawkins Elementary School ensure that his name is remembered by future generations who might never know the hell of a place called Tarawa. So what do we take away from the life of William Deane Hawkins? We see a story that is quintessentially American, a story of a boy marked by hardship who refused to be defined by his scars, a story of a man who, when faced with rejection, simply found another path forward. He was not born into a military dynasty. He was a product of the Depression, a quiet professional who discovered his extraordinary capacity for leadership in the crucible of war. His heroism wasn't reckless, it was purposeful. It was the engineer's mind identifying a problem and the cowboy's spirit executing the solution regardless of personal risk. He was the man who wouldn't quit, not out of a desire for glory, but out of a profound sense of duty to the men by his side and the mission at hand. In an age where the word hero is often used lightly, the story of Deane Hawkins provides a powerful grounding definition. He reminds us that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. He shows us that leadership is not about giving orders from the rear, but about being the first one into the fire. His life was tragically short, but his final 76 hours left a legacy of courage that continues to inspire and instruct. A shining example of a single determined individual altering the course of history. He was a quiet man who, through his actions, created an eternal roar. And that wraps up today's video. If this video resonated with you, please give it a like, leave a comment with your feedback, and subscribe to stay updated on upcoming videos. Appreciate you watching.